let's go over to Dalit Warshaw in New York. I would love to hear a little bit about when you found your compositional voice.
I like to say that music is my native language alongside English, and I learned how to read both simultaneously at age 3. And the way music just suffused my life is that my mother was a piano teacher, and so music was a constant. And I started very early. I was writing piano music. When I was 8 years old, I won a concerto competition, and the prize was to play with a local orchestra. The conductor had the gumption to ask me if I would orchestrate my piano music that had recently won a young composers competition. And I said, yes, absolutely. My mother had a figurative heart attack, and because here an 8-year-old was going to write an orchestral piece, and it just felt very, very natural to me. And I was very lucky in that before ever officially studying composition, most of my young years actually were spent learning on the job, really. I was offered the opportunity to work with performers and orchestras, which is how I figured out my sound and learned how it all works. So I always felt I had a very, I felt unrestricted, I think, in terms of style, in terms of what I wanted to say. And then later, I studied at Columbia and at Juilliard, and that was a much different, of course, much different and more self-aware relationship with composing.
You might like to talk a little bit about how the ongoing pandemic has affected your work. Would you like to say anything about that?
It's really illuminating for oneself to see how one responds creatively in these very extreme situations. And I remember right after 9/11, at first, I was in New York, and at first I wrote a very tragic a cappella choral work. But then in the course of the year, I started writing this as ecstatic, celebratory music, and I had no idea where this came from. And I think it's resilience, it's celebrating and acknowledging life. And the same thing happened now with me. So in the last 6 months, I've been working on, I'm just churning out these piano pieces that are, they're filled with something ecstatic. And also it's amazing how our art can change us, I think, the process of creating. So by your creating something uplifting, you're going to go through a process, and the piece will reflect all these, like the tension of emotions as a result. It'll be fascinating.
How do you work out how long a piece should be?
It depends on the scenario. I mean, when it's a commission, the more I know, the better, because I think constraints, in fact, are inspiring. When you know what you're dealing with, then you know how to work with it, against it, all of that.
Do you have a favorite combination of instruments or a favorite instrument to compose for?
I think I feel most natural with the orchestra, actually, and the piano, and the two inform each other. I think I relate very much to Debussy's and Ravel's sort of symbiotic interchange between piano and orchestra. Debussy, in his case, with his preludes, he wrote those piano works after all of his orchestral pieces. And so you really get a sense that he is experiencing orchestra to the point that there are 3 staves on each system for the piano. And Ravel, starting at the piano and developing it all, 3-dimensionalizing it through orchestra. So whether I write for orchestra or not, I find myself sublimating it into, even in solo works or chamber works. The piece that will be performed this evening by myself is entitled Winter Dream, in memoriam Charlotte Salomon. Now, the piece encapsulates a lot of, quite a few of my priorities that I address in many of my works. For one thing, throughout the course of my compositional experience, which has been for most of my life, I've tended to gravitate toward stories of women in history, usually artists, whose voices were cut short in some way, or they weren't heard as much as they should have been in their lifetimes. And in the case of Charlotte Salomon, she was a highly gifted German Jewish painter who lived, she was born in 1917, and she lived in Berlin, was in her early 20s as the Nazis came to power, and she found herself in hiding with her grandparents in South France for 3 years. While she was in hiding, she learned some very dramatic and tragic details about her family life, that apparently her mother had committed suicide, her aunt had committed suicide, and then as they were all together at that time, her grandmother committed suicide as well. And when that happened, Charlotte, she felt that she either also was going to go the same route, or, and this is a quote, what was she going to do? She was going to undertake something wildly eccentric. And that is exactly what she did. What she ended up creating was an astounding body of 769 canvases that were her autobiography. She designated this autobiography as a Singspiel in 3 acts, with a prologue and a cast of characters in which all the personalities in her life were given nicknames. And she proceeded to tell her life story through figurative painting. And as she is painting through the course of this time, you notice how her style changes. It begins in a very detailed, very, very colorful, ornate way as she's remembering her childhood. And as time time continues, you see that the painting is becoming increasingly hurried. There are more colors of gray. It's more abstract. And by the end of this huge, impressive amount of work, you see the images have completely gone by the wayside, and all you see are words just kind of etched in paint across the page. And on top of these canvases were overlaid tracing paper on which she put quotes of poetry, of folk songs, of philosophy, of thoughts that she herself had. And this is where the composer in me, the interest was especially piqued, quotes of music. So Carmen's Habanera, for example, figures when her father marries her stepmother, who's an opera singer. Schubert's Winterreise figures, Bach chorales, etc. So when I saw Winterreise, I was thinking, oh my goodness, I'm such a Schubert and Schumann, actually. I'm aficionado. I mean, I had to address this piece. And quotation is something I adore doing also in my music quite a bit. And so this was the perfect opportunity to take most prominently the song Gute Nacht, which opens Winterreise, and to quote it in distortion. And that's sort of, it's sort of, it's the beginning and the end of the piece. In the middle section, it really is like a nightmare. And in this nightmare, you have a collage of many of the other Schubert songs from the collection. What happened to Charlotte at the end is that she was captured by the Nazis, and at age 26, she was killed in Auschwitz, 5 months pregnant. And her work was found years later.